But I'm interested in your thoughts around sort of care partners, particularly as people approach end of life, the family who care for the person in terms of person and family centred care. How do you see the kind of care partnership and the balance between encouraging people to be part of that and be an advocate and sort of be involved versus the kind of, I hate saying the word burden, but the burden that might bring?
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Nice to hear that voice from across the pond. It's a big question, and certainly because there's truth to, let's just start with this scary or loaded word, burden. I mean, the truth of it is life's burdensome. We are, and by some narrow definition of that word, we are burdens to one another, in various ways. That's I think a very uninspired way of seeing it, but I say that to kind of just, let's try to be honest with each other. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of time to be a good caregiver. And so I guess I want to normalize this feeling of being a burden and kind of try to kind of shift it, reframe it. In some ways, it's just, that's sort of wrongly conceived. We get to be a burden to one another. We get to need one another. We get to rely on one another. And some of the most beautiful things you'll see happen in family dynamics is when, a family, the parents took care of the kids. Kids have grown up. The parents are at their later stages of life, and now the sort of roles get to reverse. And those kids can exercise all that those parents taught them about caregiving. And then the family, the elders, can be on the receiving end more, even as they're giving of their wisdom and of their time. And this is why it's really tricky to kind of find the right, just as you were doing, Leslie, is inching up on that word. So there's some truth to it, but that is the nature of being human. We need each other. There is no such thing. There's no one who doesn't need something from somebody. There's no one who, by some definition, isn't a burden in some way. That burden, being a burden, is being alive. So that's not quite at your question, but I want to open that up a little bit. But otherwise, I will see in my job in palliative care very often, the caregiver, the family member, ends up being my patient in a way. Sometimes the patient's needs are kind of clear and they're on their way. But the caregiver is suffering more than the patient. And very often it's common that in palliative care and hospice, the caregiver, the family members, end up being the patient in a way, or the focus of our energy, supportive energy. So that's another point. I think the general gist here, though, Leslie, is, it's family dependent, situation dependent, and never mind family. Not everyone has family. So let's put family in quotes: friends, neighbors. I think the trick here is to just speak openly and honestly, and safely, and sharing our concerns. If we're all really clicking along, if we're all self-aware, we know that that being alive is being a burden on some level, and that we get to care for each other, not have to care for each other, and that each of us has limitations. So just frank, open conversation about all that is really key. And last point I have to say on that for now, Leslie, is, sometimes families get overwhelmed. I've met many, many families, right, who have all the love, but their lives are just incredibly complicated, and they're dealing with incredibly complicated illnesses that would have killed someone 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, but now you can live with machines all over the place. And, it is, what's the word for I'm looking for here? Anyway, it's just a lot of work. And my point here is that sometimes, despite best intentions, we need to call in help. Sometimes that may be hiring a home health aide, calling in neighbors. And one of the basic things that we need to do as caregivers, sometimes your job as a caregiver is to bring in more care, to bring in more help for yourself, for your person, etc. And there's no shame in that. That's just the nature of life these days. It gets a little hard because sometimes not everyone has the resources to hire a $20 or $30 an hour aide. Not everyone has a network of friends and neighbors, in which case, as ever, you're just doing the best you can. But this would be a reason, for example, to call in home hospice sooner than later. One way or another, whether it's AIDS or hospice or palliative care program, blah, 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 neighbors. The point here is it's okay to ask for help. You need to ask for help. And there's no shame in that. That's just part of the deal. So, okay, sorry, let's say I'm going on and on, but those are some thoughts. I think the bottom line here is to elevate the role of the family right next to the patient. There's no one, all needs are a priority.